The massive doors stood before Sarah Chen like two metal mountains. She had seen pictures of them before, but standing here in person made her feel very small. The doors were made of some kind of silver metal that seemed to glow with its own light. Strange symbols covered every inch of the surface, telling stories of 1,000 different worlds and the creatures that lived on them. Sarah wore her simple blue uniform with the Earth flag on her shoulder. Next to all the fancy clothes and glowing bodies of the other beings around her, she looked plain. But that was exactly what she wanted. Humans had learned long ago that sometimes looking weak could be more powerful than looking strong. Behind her stood 3 other humans. Captain Rodriguez had fought in the Mars colonies. Dr. Kim had spent her whole life studying alien languages. Professor Zhang was an old man who had been watching the stars since before Sarah was born. They all looked calm, but Sarah could feel their hearts beating fast, just like hers. Around them, hundreds of different aliens waited in the giant hallway. Some floated in the air inside bubble-like suits filled with green gas. Others crawled on 6 legs and had eyes all over their heads. A few looked almost human, but their skin was blue or purple or covered in scales. They all watched the humans with curious eyes. Sarah had studied each of these species for years. The tall gray ones with the long necks were called the hegemony. They controlled most of the military ships in the galaxy. They believed that order and rules were the most important things in the universe. The short, round creatures that glowed like living lamps were the crystalline consortium. They were the smartest beings anyone had ever met. They could solve math problems that would take human computers years to figure out. Then there were the vexed Sarah tried not to stare at them, but it was hard not to. They looked like humans, but something was wrong with their eyes. All of them had the exact same expression on their faces. That was because they were not really separate beings at all. They shared one big mind between all of them. Learn something. They all knew it instantly. Sarah had spent 10 years learning about these aliens and many others. Earth had been trying to join the Galactic Council for over 50 years. Every time they asked, the aliens said no. Humans were too young, too violent, too stupid. They needed to grow up first. But Sarah knew something the aliens did not know. Humans had been watching them very carefully all these years. Not just their technology or their weapons, but how they acted, how they thought, how they felt. Humans were very good at understanding feelings, even alien feelings. A deep sound like a giant bell filled the hallway. All the floating and crawling and walking stopped. Everyone turned to look at the big doors. Slowly, without making any noise, the metal mountains began to open. Light poured out from inside like liquid gold. Sarah could hear a humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The smell of something like flowers, but not quite. Drifted out into the hallway, Sarah took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. Inside the chamber, the ceiling was so high that Sarah could not see the top. The walls curved around in a perfect circle, and they were covered with the same glowing symbols as the doors. In the center of the room was a raised platform with a simple podium made of black stone. Around the platform, thousands of seats rose up like stairs going to the sky. Most of the seats were filled with aliens of every size and shape. Some seats held just one creature. Others had dozens of tiny beings that looked like living jewels. A few seats were empty, but they still glowed with soft light. At the very top of the chamber sat 5 special seats. These belonged to the High Counselors, the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Sarah could see them clearly even from far away. They seemed to glow brighter than everything else in the room. As Sarah and her team walked toward the platform, she could feel thousands of eyes watching her. Some of the aliens whispered to each other in languages that sounded like music or wind or breaking glass. Others stayed completely silent. Sarah had practiced this walk many times in her mind. She did not hurry, but she did not walk slowly either. She kept her head up and her back straight. She wanted to look confident, but not proud, not threatening. When she reached the podium, Sarah placed her hands on the smooth black stone. It felt warm under her fingers, like it was alive. She looked up at the High Counselors and waited. the chamber became completely quiet. Even the humming sounds stopped. In all her years of studying the council, Sarah had read that this moment of silence happened before every species was tested. It was a moment for everyone to think about what was about to happen. Sarah was thinking too, but not about what the aliens expected. She was thinking about a song her grandmother used to sing when Sarah was little. It was about birds flying home. After a long winter, Sarah had no idea why she was thinking about that song now, but it made her feel calm. High Counselor Zethkri leaned forward in his seat. He was one of the hegemony, tall and gray, with eyes like black glass. When he spoke, his voice filled the entire chamber without being loud. "Human delegation," he said. "You have requested membership in the Galactic Council for the 53rd time. Each time before, your species has been found lacking in the qualities necessary for galactic citizenship. Tell us what has changed." Sarah smiled. Not a big smile, just a small one that reached her eyes. "Everything," she said simply, "and nothing at all." A ripple of confusion went through the chamber. Aliens turned to each other with puzzled expressions. This was not the kind of answer they expected, but Sarah was just getting started. High Counselor Zethkri stared at Sarah for a long moment. His black eyes showed no feeling at all. Around the chamber, thousands of aliens waited to hear what would happen next. The silence stretched on and on until Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. "Explain yourself, human," Zethkri said finally. His voice was cold and sharp like broken ice. Sarah nodded. She had expected this. "Your Honor, may I ask what happened to the last species that requested membership?" Another High Counselor spoke up. This one was from the Crystalline Consortium. Her body looked like it was made of living diamond, and when she talked, her voice sounded like tiny bells ringing. "The Zilani were rejected 6 months ago. You could not prove their worth to the Council. What did they show you?" Sarah asked. The crystal being's light flickered slightly. "They demonstrated their ability to terraform dead worlds in mere decades. Impressive, but not enough for membership." Sarah turned to look at the third High Counselor. This one was Vex, and like all Vex, she had that strange, empty look in her eyes. "And before the Zilani, the Korth Collective," the Vex answered in a voice that had no feeling in it. "They showed us how they could link the minds of different species together. Found it adequate, but insufficient." "I see," Sarah said. She walked a few steps to the left, then back to the right. The aliens watched her every move. "So each species shows you their greatest achievement, their best technology or their most powerful ability, and you judge whether it is good enough." "That is correct," Zethkri said. "This has been our way for 3,000 years. It separates the truly advanced civilizations from the primitives." Sarah stopped walking and looked up at him. "Then you have been asking the wrong question for 3,000 years." The chamber exploded with noise. Aliens clicked and buzzed and roared and sang their anger. "How dare this human insult the ancient ways of the Council?" Some of the beings stood up in their seats. Others flashed bright colors that hurt to look at. But the High Counselors stayed calm. Zethkri raised one long gray hand, and the noise stopped. "Immediately," explained, he said. Sarah felt her team step closer behind her. She could sense Captain Rodriguez's hand moving near his weapon. Even though weapons were not allowed in the chamber, Dr. Kim was probably running through alien curse. Words in her head, trying to figure out if Sarah had just insulted someone by accident. Professor Zhang was so still that he might have been made of stone. "You ask each species to show their greatest achievement," Sarah said. "But achievements are just things. Tools, tricks. Any species can learn to build bigger ships or make smarter. Computers or control the weather. Those are not what make a civilization great." The Crystal Counselor's light pulsed faster. "Then what does human?" Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. It looked like nothing special. It's just a simple box made of earth metal with a few buttons on it. Several aliens laughed when they saw it. Some of the more advanced species had technology, so small that it could not be seen without special equipment. This human device looked like something a child might make. "May I demonstrate?" Sarah asked. Zethkri looked at the other High Counselors. They seemed to talk to each other without making any sound. Finally, he nodded. "You may proceed." Sarah pressed a button on the device. At first, nothing happened. Then, very quietly, music began to play. It started with just one voice. Gah, human. Woman singing in a language that none of the aliens understood. Her voice was not perfect. It cracked a little on the high notes, and she took breaths in places that interrupted the flow of words. But something about the way she sang made the chamber completely quiet again. More voices joined in. Men and women, young and old, all singing together. The song had no words that the aliens could translate, but somehow they all understood what it meant. It was about loss. It's about missing someone who was gone forever. About the pain of love that could never be returned. The music grew stronger. Instruments began to play along with the voices. Simple instruments made of wood and metal and string. Nothing advanced. It's nothing that could destroy a planet or reshape a star. It's just tools for making sound into beauty. But it was more than just sound. As the music played, something strange happened in the chamber. Aliens who had never felt sadness before found water running down their faces. Beings who lived for thousands of years remembered what it felt like to be young and afraid. Species that had forgotten how to dream suddenly saw pictures in their minds of better worlds that might exist someday. The hegemony soldiers, who were trained never to show emotion, began to shake. The crystalline consortium, who thought only in numbers and logic, found their lights flickering in patterns they could not control. Even the Vex, who shared one mind between all of them, suddenly felt alone and individual and terrified. In the highest seats, the High Counselors sat frozen. Zethkri's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The crystal being's light dimmed to almost nothing. The Vex Counselor's empty eyes filled with something that looked almost like tears. The song built to a peak that seemed to touch the ceiling of the chamber. Every voice sang together, every instrument played in perfect harmony. For just a moment, all the different sounds became one beautiful whole, and slowly, quietly, faded away. The last note hung in the air for a long time before it finally disappeared. Sarah turned off the device, put it back in her pocket. The chamber stayed, completely silent. Thousands of aliens sat without moving, trying to understand what had just happened to them. Finally, Zethkri spoke. His voice was different now, softer, more uncertain. What? What was that? A song, Sarah said simply. Written by a human named Johann Sebastian Bach over 400 years ago. He wrote it when his wife died. He was trying to express his grief, his love, and his hope that he would see her again someday. But how? The Crystal Counselor's voice was barely a whisper. How did it make us feel things we have never felt before? Sarah smiled. Because that is what humans do best. We do not just build things or discover things or conquer things. We find meaning in suffering. We create beauty from pain. We connect with others across impossible differences. She paused and looked around the chamber at all the alien faces staring at her. You have been asking species to show you their greatest achievement, she continued. But you should be asking them too. Show you their greatest gift. And humanity's greatest gift is not our technology or our weapons or our science. It is our ability to touch the hearts of others, even when those hearts are completely different from our own. The silence that followed was different from the one before. This time, it was not empty. It was full of thoughts and feelings that had never existed in this chamber before, and in that moment, the Galactic Council began to change forever. The silence in the chamber stretched on for what felt like hours. Sarah could see aliens all around her touching their faces, trying to understand the wetness they found there. Others stared at their hands as if they had never seen them before. The music had awakened something in them that they did not know existed. Hi, Counselor Vexai was the first to break the silence. She was the 5th High Counselor, one that Sarah had not spoken to yet. Vexai belonged to a species called the Arbiters. They were ancient beings who had helped create the Council thousands of years ago. They were supposed to be completely neutral, never taking sides in any argument. But now Vexai was shaking. Her silver skin had turned pale, and her 3 eyes were wide with something that looked like fear. This is impossible, she whispered. We felt as one being. Not through technology or mental linking, but through She struggled to find the words. Through the heart. Sarah nodded. Yes, that is what music does. It connects us without wires or computers or shared minds. But it lets us feel what others feel. From his high seat, Zethkri leaned forward. His black eyes were no longer cold. They looked confused and almost angry. You speak of feelings as if they matter more than facts. Emotions are weakness. They cloud judgment. They make beings act foolishly. Do they? Sarah asked.
Oh.
She gestured around the chamber. Look at your council, High Counselor. Oh, look at that. Beings you rule over. Zethkri followed her gesture. What he saw made him sit back in his chair. All around the chamber, aliens were looking at each other in ways they never had before. The tall hegemony soldiers were staring at the small crystal. Beings with something new in their eyes. Not respect for their intelligence, but something warmer. Something like understanding the Vex Collective, who always moved and acted as one perfect unit, were scattered around their section. For the first time in centuries, they were not copying each other's movements. Each one was sitting differently, thinking their own thoughts. This is chaos, the Crystal High Counselor said. Her diamond body was flickering between different colors. Order is breaking down, unity is dissolving. Is it? Sarah asked. Or are you seeing real unity for the first time? She walked to the edge of the platform so she could see more of the chamber. For 3,000 years you have maintained peace through rules and fear. The strong species control the weak ones. Everyone follows orders. No one questions the system. You call this unity, but it is not. It is just control. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward slightly. Sarah could tell he was worried. They had planned this moment carefully, but they all knew it was dangerous. If the Council decided that humans were a threat, Earth could be destroyed before they ever made it home. But Sarah continued. We humans have been watching you for 50 years, not your technology or your weapons, but your hearts. And do you know what we discovered? She pointed to a section where the hegemony soldiers sat. The hegemony teaches that strength and order are everything. But we watched your soldiers when they thought no one was looking. We saw them help injured aliens on distant worlds. We saw them risk their own lives to save beings they were supposed to consider inferior. The hegemony soldiers looked at each other in surprise. They had thought those acts of kindness were secret. Sarah turned to the crystal beings. The crystalline consortium believes that logic and intelligence are the only things that matter. But we watched your scientists work for decades to cure a disease that affected only one small species that could give you nothing in return. You did it because it was right, not because it was logical. The crystal beings began to glow brighter. Some of them started moving toward each other, something they rarely did. In the Vex, Sarah said, looking at the collective, you think you are one mind, one perfect being. But we watched individual Vex make different choices when they were alone. We saw creativity and rebellion and independent thought, even when the collective tried to suppress it. The Vex section erupted in confusion. Some of them stood up and began arguing with others. Their perfect unity was breaking apart. You are destroying everything, Zethkri shouted. He stood up from his chair, his tall gray form towering over the chamber. 3,000 years of peace. 3,000 years of stability. You humans come here with your primitive emotions and tear it all down. The chamber exploded with noise again. But this time it was different. Instead of just anger, there were other sounds. Some aliens were crying. Others were laughing. A few were singing softly to themselves, trying to recreate the feeling the human music had given them. Yes, Sarah said, her voice somehow carrying over all the noise. We are destroying your peace. Because it was never real peace. It was just fear wearing a mask. She looked directly at Zethkri. You want to know what has changed since our last 52 requests? We stopped trying to prove we were good enough for your system. Instead, we decided to show you what was wrong with your system. High Counselor Vex High stood up slowly. Her silver skin was still pale, but her 3 eyes were no longer afraid. They were thoughtful. And what would you replace it with, human? Sarah smiled. It was not a happy smile or a sad smile. It was the kind of smile someone makes when they are about to say something important. "Nothing," she said. "We would not replace your system at all. We would just add something to it, something you have been missing for 3,000 years, which is..." The Crystal High Counselor asked. "Truth," Sarah said simply. "The truth about who you really are under all the rules and roles and expectations. The truth about what you really want instead of what you think you should want. The truth about the connections you already have with each other, connections that exist despite all your differences." Around the chamber, aliens were beginning to move. Not in the organized way they usually moved, but randomly. Hegemony soldiers were walking over to talk to crystal beings. Vex were separating from their collective groups and approaching other species. Small aliens were floating up to sit with larger ones. It looked like chaos. But to Sarah, it looked like the beginning of something beautiful. Zethkri watched it all happening. His face went through many expressions: anger, fear, confusion, and, finally, something that might have been wonder. "This is madness," he said quietly. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "The very best kind of madness. The kind that makes life worth living." The chamber continued to buzz with activity as beings who had never spoken to each other began to have conversations. Arguments broke out, but they were honest arguments between individuals, not the cold political debates of species representatives. And in the middle of it all, Sarah Chen stood quietly and watched the Galactic Council tear itself apart and begin to rebuild itself into something completely new. The chamber had become something no one had ever seen before. Aliens who had sat in the same seats for centuries were now wandering around like lost children. The careful order that had kept peace for 3,000 years was crumbling faster than anyone could stop it. Sarah watched a hegemony commander approach a group of small furry beings called the Whisper Folk. The hegemony had conquered the Whisper Folk's world 200 years ago, but had allowed them to keep their culture. In exchange for loyalty, now the commander knelt down to their level and spoke to them in their own chirping language. "I am sorry," the commander said. "We told ourselves we were protecting you, but we were really just controlling you." One of the Whisper Folk, an elderly female with gray fur around her eyes, reached out and touched the commander's hand. "We know," she chirped softly. "We have always known. But we also know that you believed you were doing right." Sarah felt tears in her own eyes. This was what she had hoped for. But seeing it happen was more powerful than she had imagined. But not everyone was ready for this new honesty. From across the chamber came a loud roar. General Kethfer of the hegemony military was standing on his seat, his gray skin flushed dark with anger. "This is madness," he shouted. "We are warriors. Do not apologize to those we have conquered. Strength is everything. Order is everything." Other hegemony soldiers began to stand up behind him. Some nodded in agreement, but others looked uncertain. The music had touched them all, but years of training were hard to forget. At the same time, in the crystalline consortium section, a brilliant flash of light erupted. Dr. Prismart was glowing so brightly that other beings had to look away. "Emotional contamination," she announced in her bell-like voice. "These humans have infected us with chaos. We must return to pure logic immediately." Several crystal beings began to pulse in agreement, their lights synchronized in mathematical patterns. But others dimmed their glow and moved away from the group. The Vex Collective was having the worst reaction of all. Half of them were still sitting together trying to maintain their shared mind, but the other half had scattered throughout the chamber, and Sarah could see the panic in their eyes. They had never been alone in their own thoughts before. The feeling of being individual and separate was terrifying to them. "Connect us back." One of the scattered Vex cried out to his collective, "We cannot bear this isolation." But the collective Vex just stared at him with empty eyes. "You have chosen separation," they said in their emotionless voice. "You are no longer Vex." The separated Vex began to weep. Not the gentle tears that the music had brought to other aliens, but deep sobs of complete despair. Sarah felt Captain Rodriguez moved closer to her. "Sarah," he whispered, "this is getting out of control. Maybe we should stop this before someone gets hurt." But before Sarah could answer, another voice rang out across the chamber. It was High Counselor Vexai, the ancient arbiter. She was standing now, her silver skin glowing with an inner light that Sarah had never seen before. "Enough," Vexai commanded. "All of you, stop and listen." Her voice carried a power that made everyone freeze. Even General Kethfer stopped roaring and turned to look at her. "For 3,000 years, Vexai continued, the arbiters have watched over this council. We have seen wars prevented and peace maintained. We have been proud of what we built here." She paused and looked around the chamber with her three ancient eyes. "But the humans are right. What we built was not peace. It was a prison." Gasps echoed throughout the chamber. An arbiter had never taken sides before, never in the entire history of the council. "I've lived for 5,000 years, Vexai said. I have seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. And in all that time, I have never felt what I felt when that human music played. I have never experienced true connection with another being." She began to walk down from her high seat, toward the center of the chamber. Other arbiters throughout the room began to stand up, their silver skin glowing brighter. "We arbiters chose neutrality because we thought it was wisdom. But neutrality is just another word for fear. Fear of choosing wrong. Fear of caring too much. Fear of being hurt." General Kethfer pointed at her with a shaking hand. "You are betraying everything the council stands for." "No," Vexai said calmly. "I am saving it." She reached the platform where Sarah stood and turned to face the entire chamber. "The human Sarah Chen asked us what we would do with truth. I will tell you what I will do. I will admit that the arbiters have made mistakes. We have allowed injustice to continue because it was easier than fighting for what was right. Stayed silent when we should have spoken. We have been cowards, hiding behind the word neutral." The chamber erupted again, but this time the noise was different. It was not just anger or fear. It was the sound of beings finally saying things they had kept hidden for centuries. A crystal being stood up and announced, "We have been pretending that logic is more important than love, but we know that is a lie." A hegemony soldier shouted, "We have been taught that showing mercy is weakness, but mercy is what makes us strong." A group of Vex who were still connected to the collective suddenly broke apart, their shared mind finally shattering completely. "We choose to be individuals," they declared together, which made them all laugh, because they had said it at the same time. But the chaos was spreading beyond just the chamber. Sarah could see lights flashing outside the great windows. Ships were moving in the space around the council station. Some were leaving quickly, carrying delegates who could not handle what was happening. Others were arriving, bringing beings who had heard about the strange events and wanted to see for themselves. Dr. Kim stepped up beside Sarah. "The communication networks are going crazy," she whispered. "Every world in the galaxy is hearing about this. Some governments are calling for their delegates to come home immediately. Others are sending more representatives." Professor Zheng, who had been silent through everything, finally spoke. "This is spreading faster than we expected. The galaxy is choosing sides." Sarah nodded. She had known this might happen, but seeing it unfold was both thrilling and terrifying. "The question is," she said quietly, "will they choose the side of truth or the side of comfortable lies?" As if to answer her question, alarms began to sound throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red and yellow. Mechanical voice announced, "Alert, alert. Multiple fleet movements detected. All council security forces report to stations." Immediately, Sarah looked up at the High Counselors. Sethkri was gripping his chair so tightly that the metal was beginning to bend. The Crystal Counselor's light was flickering like a broken lamp. The Vex Counselor looked completely lost, but Vexai just smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. "And so it begins," she said softly. "The galaxy will never be the same." Outside the great windows, more ships appeared in the darkness of space. Some flew the banners of the old alliances. Others carried symbols that no one had seen before. The careful balance of power that had held the galaxy together was breaking apart. And in the center of it all, one human woman stood quietly and wondered if she had just saved the galaxy or destroyed it. 3 days later, Sarah stood at the same podium in the council chamber. But everything else had changed. Half the seats were empty. Many species had recalled their delegates when the chaos began. Others had simply fled when they realized the old order was crumbling. The hegemony military had withdrawn most of their forces to defend their homeworlds. Several crystal beings had shut themselves down completely, unable to cope with the emotions the music had awakened in them. But the seats that remained filled were different now. Instead of aliens sitting in separate sections by species, they were mixed together. A hegemony soldier sat next to a whisper folk elder. Crystal beings shared space with floating gas creatures. Former enemies were having quiet conversations. The 5 high counselor seats at the top of the chamber were no longer occupied by the same beings. Zethkri had left the station during the night, taking many of his followers with him. The Crystal High Counselor had gone into what her people called deep meditation, which might last for years. The Vex High Counselor had simply vanished when her collective mind finally broke apart completely. Only Vex High remained in her seat, along with 2 new beings who had been chosen by the delegates still present. One was Commander Vexora, the hegemony soldier, who had apologized to the Whisper Folk. The other was a crystal being called Harmony Seeker, who had been one of the first to admit that logic was not everything. Sarah looked out at the reduced assembly. Many of the faces were tired. Some looked scared. But all of them looked real, in a way they had not 3 days ago. "We have received reports from across the galaxy," Sarah began. 17 star systems have declared independence from the old council structure. 9 species have recalled all their representatives and closed their borders. The hegemony has mobilized their fleet and is demanding that the human contamination be removed from council space. Murmurs went through the chamber. Everyone knew the situation was serious. But, Sarah continued, 43 worlds have sent new delegates to join us. 12 species that were never allowed council membership before have asked to participate. And most importantly, we have received over 10,000 personal messages from individual beings across the galaxy. She activated her small device again. But this time, instead of music, voices began to speak. Alien voices in dozens of different languages. "I am a hegemony engineer," said one voice. "I've built weapons for conquest. But yesterday, for the first time, I told my commander that I wanted to build homes instead. He said I was weak, said I was finally strong." Another voice spoke in the chirping language of the Whisper Folk. Dr. Kim translated quietly. "I am no longer afraid to speak my mind to those who rule us. The humans showed us that truth is not rebellion. Truth is freedom." A crystal being's bell-like voice rang out. "I have spent my life believing that emotions were inferior to logic. But now I understand that the greatest logic is love." Voice after voice spoke. Stories of beings who had heard about what happened in the council chamber and decided to change their own lives. Soldiers who refused to fight unjust wars. Scientists who chose to work on healing instead of weapons. Leaders who admitted their mistakes and asked for forgiveness. But there were other stories too. Reports of violence breaking out as old enemies finally spoke their true feelings. Governments cracking down on citizens who demanded more freedom. Species threatening war against any world that supported the human madness. When the voices stopped, the chamber was quiet again. It was a different kind of quiet than before. It was the quiet of beings thinking deeply about important things. Commander Vexora stood up in her new High Counselor seat. "The galaxy is splitting apart," she said. "Some say this is humanity's fault. Others say it is long overdue. What do you say, Sarah Chenevert?" Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for her entire life. "I say that the galaxy was already broken," she replied. "We did not break it. We just showed you where the cracks were." She walked to the edge of the platform again, looking at each face in the reduced assembly. Change is always frightening. When you have lived with lies for so long, truth feels like an attack. When you have been numb for centuries, feeling emotions is painful. When you have been controlled by others, freedom seems impossible. A young Vex, one of those who had broken away from the collective, raised her hand. "What if we cannot handle this freedom? What if we make wrong choices?" Sarah smiled at her. "You will make wrong choices. All beings do. That is what makes you alive instead of machines. But what about the wars?" asked a small floating being. What about the chaos? Some species are already fighting. There will be wars, Sarah admitted. There will be chaos. There will be pain and loss and terrible mistakes. But there will also be love and joy and connections that you never imagined possible. High Counselor Vexai spoke from her seat. And what of the council itself? Should we dissolve it completely? Should we try to rebuild it? Sarah looked at her, then at all the beings in the chamber. Now, that is not for me to decide. That is for you to decide. All of you, together. She paused and let her words sink in. Humanity did not come here to rule you or replace your leaders or tell you how to live. We came to give you a gift. The gift of knowing that you have choices. The gift of understanding that your feelings matter. The gift of realizing that you are not alone. Crystal being called out, what if the hegemony attacks? What if they try to force the old order back? Then you'll choose how to respond, Sarah said. You might choose to fight. You might choose to flee. You might choose to try to understand why they are so afraid. But whatever you choose, it will be your choice. Made with open hearts and honest minds, she walked back to the center of the podium and looked around the chamber one last time. The human delegation came here asking for membership in the Galactic Council, but we no longer want membership in the old council. That council was built on fear and control and lies. Some beings looked disappointed. Others looked confused. Instead, Sarah continued, we would like to help you build something new. Not a council that rules through force, but a community that connects through understanding. Not a government that controls its citizens, but a family that supports its members. Commander Thexera leaned forward. What would you call this new? Community? Sarah smiled. I think that is the first decision you should all make together. The chamber erupted in discussion. Not the angry shouting of 3 days ago, but the excited chatter of beings planning something wonderful. Aliens turned to each other, sharing ideas in languages that mixed together like a symphony, and in the middle of it all, Sarah Chen stood, quietly, and listened to the sound of a galaxy learning to be free. Outside the great windows, some ships still flew the banners of the old powers, but others were already displaying new symbols created by beings who had decided to choose hope over fear. The galaxy would never be the same. There would be struggles and setbacks and times when the old ways seemed easier. But for the first time, in 3,000 years, every being in the galaxy had a choice, and that, Sarah thought, was worth any price they might have to pay.